right, you guys, welcome to our first lesson in our quarter four topics about biology. We are looking at chapter one, section one in our biology textbook. This section is all about an introduction to biology. There's a statement here that says all living things share the characteristics of life. Now, what I want you guys to do is to take a second and think about what are things you already know about living things, and what are some things that you think you might find out about some living things. And then later you can come back and think about what you learned from this section about living things. So take a second and pause it and think about those thoughts right now. All right. So here are three kind of essential questions or main ideas that you need to be able to answer to yourself when we are finished going through this section of the chapter. Question one, what is biology? Question two, what are possible benefits of studying biology? And then question three, what are the characteristics of living things? And like I said a second ago, if you can answer these questions when we are done, you are good to go. You know exactly what you need to know from this section. Well, let's start here with the science of life. Biology literally is the study of all living things. Biology, the word, comes from the Greek root bio, which means life, and then logos for the logi part, biology. The logos part means study. So biology is the study of life. It's going to study the origins and history of life and once living things. It's going to study the structures of living things. It's going to study how living things interact with one another. And in biology, you will study how living things function. So there's a lot going on about living things that you will look at in biology. What does a biologist do? So a biologist is a person who studies biology, a scientist who specifically studies living things. They study the diversity of life. They might research diseases, so cancer research, heart problems, this whole COVID-19 situation that's going on right now. Um, they develop technologies, all the things that benefit people medically. They can improve agriculture, like how can we rapidly produce more crops and make them more abundant, more healthy, bigger, that kind of thing. Biologists might help preserve the environment, all the whole global warming situation. Biologists would help take care of that as well. And there's a lot more too that we haven't mentioned here, but this is a small snippet of things that a biologist might do. Okay, when we think about living things, there are 7 characteristics that you should always think of. Living things are one, they're made of one or more cells. Two, they display organization, and what that means is they have cells that form tissues, they have tissues that form organs, organs that form organ systems, and then organ systems that come together to make the whole organism. That's what displays organization means. Um, they grow and develop, so they start small and get bigger. Living things can reproduce, have babies, create offspring. They respond to stimuli. If something gets thrown at you, you're probably going to duck because you are a living thing. They require energy. People, we need sleep, we need food, we need water, all the things that give us energy. They maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis, which we'll talk about later, is kind of a way to regulate your natural body systems so living things can maintain homeostasis. And then eventually, the final one here, number 8, they cause themselves to have adaptations or evolve over time. So at the bottom, it says an organism is anything that has one or once had, excuse me, anything that has or once had all of these characteristics. It has to have all of them. If you take away one or two or three, it's not a living thing. It literally has to have all 8 of these characteristics to be considered a living thing. Okay, let's talk about what it means to be made of one or more cells. So all living things have cells, which are the basic unit of structure and function in all living things. Living things can be unicellular, which means they're made of one cell. So that's going to be stuff like bacteria or little amoeba. Or they can be multicellular, which means they have many cells. So things like humans or animals or plants. Living things display organization, and like I said earlier, that means they're arranged in an orderly way. Single cell organisms have certain little structures. That's how they show their organization. Multicellular organisms have specialized cells that are organized into tissues. Tissues are organized into organs. Organs are organized into organ systems, and those all work together to support the entire organism. So that's what it means to display organization. Living things grow and develop. So most organisms begin as a single cell, and the addition of mass to an organism, often in the form of new cells and structures, is called growth. The process of natural changes over the lifetime of an organism is called development. So growth just simply means getting bigger, and development means learning and adapting to the environment and changing developmentally. Living things reproduce. Reproduction is the production of offspring. Organisms that can breed with one another and produce fertile offspring are known as species. And reproduction is not essential for the survival of an individual, but it is essential for the continuation of a species. If a certain organism stopped reproducing and stopped having babies, like altogether, all at once stopped, that organism wouldn't exist anymore after they died out. So that's why it's essential for the species. Living things are also going to respond to stimuli. So anything that is part of the internal or external environment and causes a reaction by the organism is called a stimulus. So anything that might affect the organism is called a stimulus. And then a reaction to that stimulus is a response. If I were to have a little wad of paper and throw it at you, and you were to duck out of the way, the stimulus would be throwing the paper at you, and the response would be to duck out of the way. So it's kind of like a cause and effect, or a cause and a reaction. Living things also require energy. Living things get their energy from food. Most plants and some unicellular organisms use light energy from the sun to make their own food. And organisms that cannot make their own food get energy by consuming other organisms. So organisms either make their own food or eat things that make their own food or eat things that make their own food. It's kind of a cycle, which we'll talk about soon. But every living thing needs energy to function. Okay, here's that funny word that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Living things can maintain homeostasis. Again, homeostasis is the regulation of an organism's internal conditions to maintain life. If anything happens within or to an organism that affects its normal state, processes um, begin that kind of restore the normal state. So if you get really sick, that means something is messing up with your normal state. Sometimes you'll get a fever when you get sick. That fever is your body's response to the thing causing the sickness, trying to help you go back to normal. So getting a fever is one way that your body tries to maintain homeostasis. Living things can adapt or evolve over time. So an adaptation is any inherited characteristic that results from changes to a species over time. Adaptations enable species to survive and pass on their genes to the next generation. Adaptations are usually developed in response to an environmental factor. So the way that that an organism's body adapts to the environment, that's called adaptation. Okay, those are the characteristics of living things. If you need a little more information, be sure to go back and read chapter 1, section 1. That there was a PDF posted on this week's announcement that contained chapter 1, section 1 if you need to go back and read that just to get a little more knowledge from this section. Or if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email or a Google Hangouts chat question, and I'll try to elaborate some stuff for you. Otherwise, make your way to the post that has our discussion board and be sure to do this week's discussion board. Read the prompt and respond to it with a thorough response. Make sure you answer it thoroughly, not just a quick little answer. And then at some point in the next couple days or this evening or whenever, find some of your classmates' responses and reply to them with another thoughtful, thorough response. And you will be good to go for this week's discussion board.